The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover Indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland says the Interior's plan to investigate government-run boarding schools will soon be unveiled. She was the keynote speaker for the 25th Annual Lake Tahoe Summit. The summit brings together policymakers, federal agencies, the private sector, and others to look at environmental issues facing the Tahoe Basin. Secretary Haaland talked about the importance of that kind of collaboration when it comes to addressing climate change. She mentioned several fires burning across the western part of the country and said we no longer have fire seasons, but rather fire years. After her remarks yesterday, she spoke to us exclusively and gave us an update on the investigation into boarding schools.
Well, we are so grateful. We've had a tremendous outreach from Indian tribes across the nation in support of our efforts on the Federal Indian School Initiative. We're currently still finishing our plan. That should be rolled out fairly soon. But you can bet that Indian tribes, tribal leaders, community activists who have been working on this issue for a very long time will be given a voice in how this is carried out, and certainly will respect the tribes and how they want to handle issues as we move forward.
This comes just after the report of 200 graves found at the Stewart Indian School, which is less than 30 miles from Tahoe. For the first time, a Native American may become the director of the National Park Service. President Joe Biden nominated Charles Sams for the post on Wednesday. The U.S. Senate will hold his confirmation hearing soon. Sams is Cayuse and Walla Walla of the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation in Oregon. Earlier this year, he served as his tribe's interim executive director. The Navy veteran is currently serving as a council member to the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. For more than 25 years, Sams worked in state and tribal governments and in the nonprofit natural resource and conservation management fields. If confirmed, he will be the 19th permanent director of the National Park Service. The Park Service is under the Department of the Interior. A voting win for the Pasquayaqui tribe in Arizona as the tribe reaches an agreement to reinstate an early voting site on its lands. In 2020, the tribe sued the Pima County Recorder's Office after the early voting site was removed. The tribe had support from the city of Tucson and the county. Still, a judge ruled against the tribe, but now a new settlement has been reached. On Monday, the tribe and the county announced the agreement to set up the early voting site. Pasquayaqui voters will be able to use this site for voting in statewide primary and general elections through December 2024. Jonathan Diaz with the Voting Rights at Campaign Legal Center shared stories about how tribal citizens have to drive 3 hours to vote. He noted in his statement that showed how tribal citizens do not have equal access to voting that their non-native neighbors enjoy. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is modernizing how it maintains titles to federal Indian trusts and restricted fee lands. Among other updates, the BIA's Land Title and Records Office will now maintain title documents electronically. The office maintains titles for land the U.S. holds in trust for American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and individuals. Brian Newland, the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, says the updates are better suited to make sure records are preserved and maintained properly for the benefit of current and future generations. The final rule also allows the Land Title and Records Office to efficiently address title-related actions that support Indian land transactions. Well, California's Senate is on a path to approving a paid Native American Day for its court workers. James Ramos, who is Serrano and Cahuilla, has been working to enact a California Native American Day since 1998. The lawmaker says this is one more step forward in recognizing the history and culture of American Indians in the state. The Judicial Council, a sponsor of the bill, voted in January to make sure Native American Day would be a paid holiday for court employees. And this does not create an additional paid holiday for court personnel because Columbus Day would be exchanged for another state holiday. Court personnel are currently the only state workers receiving the existing October 12th holiday as a paid day off. Ramos is the first California Native American lawmaker elected in the state's 170-year history. Well, congratulations are in order for a softball team in Oklahoma. The Green Country All-Stars won the championship game of the Little League World Series on Wednesday. And to this, the team is made up of Indigenous athletes.
And it comes down to Jasmine Miller, Cambry Casey.
An estimated 80% of the team are Native Americans who come from various nations in Oklahoma. The players include Choctaw, Cherokee, Creek, and Kiowa players, according to Indiansports.com. Haley Galvin, who is from the Cherokee Nation, serves as the team's head coach. The All-Stars are based out of Muskogee, and they played their championship game in Greenville, North Carolina, and defeated Virginia 9-1. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Climate change is impacting the world. How can Indian Country respond?
Plus, the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism looks at child sexual abuse. And what does it mean to be a tribal member?
This is Indian Country Today.
An alarming report from the United Nations tells of the devastating effect of climate change. Jade Begay, Climate Justice Campaign Director for Indian Collective, has this response.
Just to break down a bit of what is in this report says that the climate crisis is very much here. And over the next 30 years, between now and 2050, because of the inaction that has taken place over the last 40 years, because of the lies around climate change being a reality, this report is telling us that we're going to be experiencing severe climate impacts, meaning more wildfire, drought, extreme weather. And that is really what, we're going to have to just deal with. There's not much we can do to the course of climate change between now and 2050, the middle of the century. But what we can change and what there is opportunity to change is what happens from 2050 beyond, meaning, what we can change is how the world looks and how the climate, how safe the climate will be for our future generations. So the big recommendation from this report is that we need to rapidly keyword reduce our emissions and achieve global net zero by 2050. That will ensure that we keep the climate within the 1.5 Celsius mark. And that's really important, because if we exceed that 1.5 Celsius mark for our global temperature, and we start moving towards 2 degrees Celsius, we're in big trouble. That means many Indigenous communities living on coasts will likely have to migrate, losing their traditional life ways. Our food sovereignty as Native communities and nations will be at risk, thinking of all the communities that rely on subsistence, having the salmon run, ensuring that the caribou are alive and well. So all of those things will be impacted, and in a very severe and stark way if we don't stay within that 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. In fact, here at Indian Collective, we're really invested in using traditional ecological knowledge or Indigenous ecological knowledge to adapt to the climate crisis.
Thank you, Jade Begay, Indian Collective on Climate Change. Child sexual abuse is a scourge on communities, and experts say it may affect as many as half of all Native American children. Our partners at the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism at Arizona State University have this report
One day he came from the north side, and I was outside feeding the goats bottle, and after I did that, I went to sheep corral and did some more feeding over there. They were both walking that way, and they said, pick the girl up in 20 minutes to 30 minutes and about to turn off, and that never happened. We called the police, and it took them a while to come. 2 hours to 3 hours. The sex offender was taking the girl, and seems like nobody cares. Even though we report, they don't look. We went to the president's office and we asked them if they would set up an Amber Alert. They told us she was too old.
Just
they
under
can't.
12 years old and under.
Yeah.
There's always Amber Alerts issued for non-custodial parent. If a child's in danger. I sit on the Budget and Finance Committee and also the chairwoman of the Sexual Assault Prevention Subcommittee. That committee was established back in 2016. The nation, we suffered a severe loss of Ashton Mike. She was taken from her home and sexually assaulted and murdered.
There's a lot of offenders out there who get to re-offend and move on to other children in the family. We provide medical services for children and adults who have concerns of child sexual abuse or sexual assault. And I'm here, boots on the ground, seeing, and I'm finding out all kinds of things about the family and the history and how vulnerable they are.
I don't know that there's any child sex abuse case that is ever an easy case. When you have a child witness, that in and of itself, presents unique challenges. It comes down to, can I prove the elements beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury?
I have to say, all this time I've been here, I can't tell which cases are going to get a response and which ones aren't. We don't get feedback. And I've been to federal court once for a child sex abuse case. So I know by now I should have gone many, many more times, several times a month.
I met Christine early in 2015, and she shared with me the challenges that she's been having trying to navigate the criminal justice system.
There is no justice. Not within the Navajo Nation, not within the state, not within the federal courts. As soon as I found out, as soon as my son told me, we made the police report. And then the FBI agent told me that there was a confession and that he was going to forward for prosecution, and then nothing happened. I mean, we had a perpetrator confess, and then the U.S. attorney said that there was insufficient evidence. I thought that maybe we were the only ones going through this, and why isn't anybody listening? Why isn't anybody doing anything? Why isn't anybody helping? And I think that it happens almost in every family.
I would say that we haven't really appreciated the effects of colonization of the boarding schools. It's like been one thing on top of another, on top of another.
Children, families, I should say, some families, each generation were in boarding schools. We know that when there is a history of child sexual abuse, that there's cycles of abuse that can occur. Those kind of behaviors are learned and they can be repeated or reinforced in different ways.
They're just little victims, you know, they're just little victims everywhere. Anybody can do anything to them, and they've been violated in so many ways anyway, that what's sexual abuse? You know, it's like one more thing that's going to happen to them.
And like in our communities, the perpetrator stays, you know, like within the home or within the community. I feel like I blame myself for not taking better care of him. He doesn't come home a lot. I just think that it must be really traumatic for him to come here.
That's the challenge, is if these cases are not prosecuted, then there's no protection to the victim survivor. And also these individuals then are not registered as sex offenders. And so we don't know if there's a habitual type. We do have an initiative called Save a Child, Heal the Nation, in recognizing the type of trauma that our people have experienced and understanding what does that mean to be a trauma-informed nation. And when people ask me, well, what's the outcome? For me, it's healing. And the reason why I say healing is because I cannot depend on an investigator or a court system to provide or to make that person whole.
And I see what's available spiritually and the ceremonies when they're explained to me, and the prayers. Oh my God, there's a wealth of healing there. Just being connected to the land in a way that we're not at all, those of us who live in the city, and that's very healing. And that's the most important thing.
The U.S. Census reports an 86.5% increase in American Indians and Alaska Natives. But what is an enrolled tribal member? Blood quantum, when and where one is born are just a few considerations. The Boys Fort Band of Chippewa are grappling with this. Its chair, Kathy Chavers, joins us. She also chairs the Minnesota Chippewa Tribes.
We are trying to do a referendum for all the tribal members, because enrollment blood quantum is a huge issue for us, because there was a Wilder study done a few years back that shows that different scenarios of if we went down to 1/8 blood quantum versus 1/4 blood quantum, which is the blood requirement right now. And if we did nothing at all, it shows that eventually we will no longer exist. And so there is something that needs to be done, but what exactly is that? And then the other thing is regarding the Canadian blood, because as Chippewa or Ojibwe or Anishinaabe, we have traveled, a lot of our ancestors are from Canada, and we traveled on the Great Lakes and the other various bodies of water to try to get here to Net Lake where I am, and other areas where there was rice, deer, moose, you know, things to eat. And so over the centuries, we traveled those waterways and we landed here. So a lot of our ancestors are in Canada. Now, Canadians don't have blood quantum. So, you know, another part of the Wilder study was to try and include that other blood, plus other tribal blood, such as there's Ojibwe bands out in Michigan. So there's all kinds of different ways and different perspectives on how to deal with that. But it's very difficult because everybody has in their own mind what they feel it should be.
Some tribes are looking at tribal citizenship or even a cultural competency test.
It could be a long-range strategy for tribal renewal. However, we just went through an all-staff training here last week on the boarding school era. And if you went by cultural competency now, a lot of Native people don't know a lot about Native people because of the boarding school and historical trauma that we faced from that boarding school with, you know, our language being taken and our culture being taken away from us and basically beaten out of us and tortured out of us. And that historical trauma weighs heavy with us today. There's even myself as an example. I lived 19 miles from the reservation my whole life and did not know my grandmother was fluent or part of the boarding school. She never spoke the language. She never taught the culture. She never did anything. And to this day, I regret not tapping into that knowledge, but was unaware of it because of the historical trauma that my grandmother faced when she was at the boarding school.
That was Kathy Shavers from the Minnesota Chippewa Tribes. The Alaska Claims Settlement Act turns 50. It created corporations, but there's still tribes in Alaska. ICT correspondent Megan Sullivan is working on a series of stories to put this into context. Younger generations are worried.
Younger people who were born after 1971 are unable to become shareholders in an Alaska Native corporation unless they inherit shares or are gifted shares. And a number of the corporations now have worked around this problem and are looking to open up enrollment to descendants. But because of this, a lot of people, young people, have questions about the process and are, starting to mobilize around the topic. There's a couple different kind of options for a young Alaska Native. They could be a tribal member and a shareholder in their corporation, or they could only be enrolled in one. And so you see that tension there where there's a little bit of a division where people are either a tribal citizen or a shareholder. Some people want to be both. Some people want to join their tribe. Some people want to be a shareholder, but sometimes they're unable to because of rules like not being able to open up to descendants. And so you see that tension there, and you see kind of people looking for that belonging, and emotions run high when people aren't able to enroll as a shareholder or as a tribal citizen. So that's kind of what our series was looking at, the division between the generations and sometimes even between tribes and corporations. As time goes on, more people are concerned about this issue because more and more Alaska Natives aren't able to be shareholders right now. And if there's no shareholders for the Alaska Native corporations, it begs the question, what happens to the corporations? What happens to the traditional lands the corporations oversee? So our latest identity story was kind of looking at potential solutions around the issue of enrollment in corporations.
Thanks, ICT correspondent Megan Sullivan. Koo Stevens' great-grandfather, Frank Quinn, attended the Stewart Indian School in 1913. He ran away 3 times. Koo decided to reenact his great-grandfather's escape. Caitlin Onawa-Boiselle has this report.
I'm gonna put on my socks before I go over there.
Koo Stevens is 17 years old and the descendant of a boarding school survivor. His family organized a 2-day run to remember those who did or didn't make it home.
I've never been one for retying shoes over and over, so to anybody else, you just come here and you see these old buildings. You see the cool rocks on the walls and the old window panes. You can tell it's an old place. But to me, it's, what happened here. And it's a lot different to just anybody else coming here and visiting. It's a lot more personal.
At just 8 years old, Koo's great-grandfather broke out of the Stewart Indian School to escape the cruel and harsh conditions. Now Koo is retracing his great-grandfather's escape.
Because as an 8-year-old to cross 50 miles over these hills, that's a feat.
We know from our archives that students typically were not in the best health because they weren't fed well. We know that clothing was often an issue. They were given a uniform and typically hand-me-down shoes that were left over from U.S. soldiers. So definitely not the clothing and nor any kind of equipment that you would think anyone, a healthy adult, would need, much less an 8-year-old. But again, we have firsthand accounts of these types of very heroic, just absolutely courageous attempts by these young people to get back to their families.
But Koo's great-grandfather wasn't the only one who attempted to run away.
To federal representatives, people that were paid by Uncle Sam to round up students, to take them to very far away institutions for boarding school. Also, bounties were put out for young Indian children.
Often, the federal government would pay people to find runaways. The scene was happening at dozens of other government-run boarding schools for Native children. Koo's journey started at the Stewart Indian School and ended at the Yerington Paiute tribe. Koo is a cross-country runner at his high school. His great-grandfather was just 8 when he ran the same path to get home. That journey took them both uphill. Koo ran during the day. His family says it's more likely his great-grandfather, Frank, ran at night to avoid being seen. Koo ended his journey with a celebration from friends and family. He says he even felt his ancestors on his feet.
It didn't really hit me until the end about what I was doing. Running down that hill and, seeing my valley and seeing my home and just my people's land out here. Oh man, goosebumps all the way down.
And he knows what he would say to his great-grandfather if he was here today.
Thanks for getting me this far, because without him and the decisions he would have made, to even run away from here, if he didn't, I couldn't even be here. Thanks for being a good man and wanting to be with your family and wanting to support them in any way that you could, because that's family. You do anything for them. We both did it.
In Nevada.
Yeah, thanks for coming again.
Caitlin Anawa Boycell, Indian Country Today.
For breaking news and updates, go to IndianCountryToday.com. Stay safe, my relatives. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. This is Indian Country Today.